Hello, and welcome to the F-14 Tomcat radio show.
That was Grumman employee John Burnell, 1955 to 1994. Thank you, sir. Welcome to the F-14 Tomcat radio show, straight out of Calverton, Grumman, Calverton, where all 712 F-14 Tomcats were built. I'd like to introduce you to our co-host, Siphon from VF-31 Tomcatters.
Oh.
And we have Ken with us from VF-14 the Tophatters.
How's it going, everybody?
We're also joined tonight by our special guest, our pilot of the month. He's Gerald Leekster, VF-102 Diamondbacks.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate everything. Appreciate you guys coming. We're going to start the show off tonight. We're going to catch up with our first guest, who is Rick Llinarres, and he is a photographer. Did a lot of work with VF-103, The Bones, and a lot of work out over Fallon, Top Gun, and it's a lot of pictures that we feature and we show, regularly, and something we're excited about. Excited to bring him with us and find out just exactly how Rick was able to make his way into the jet. So I'm going to bring him up right now and give him a call. It's an interesting story because he's got a great background, a great career, great history. Hey, Rick, good evening, sir.
Hey, how are you?
All right, good. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And I was just telling the guys a little bit about a little bit of work he did with VF-103 and photography and featuring it a lot on the page. And it's something we're excited to bring you on and share.
Sure. Happy to chat.
Let's start out with your background, actually, of childhood, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. And certainly for aviation fans, Long Island back in the day was really the hotbed between Republic Aviation and certainly Grumman, which my dad was an executive in for 30-odd years, and pretty tight-knit, family-oriented company. People were proud to work there, and for good reason. We watched the lunar module land in 1969. My father had us all around TV, and that's not your average accomplishment.
Absolutely.
And then just aviation was a natural part of the family. That the family's fortunes rose and fell with the company. Most of the time rose. And again, because it was a family-oriented company, they did. From what I remember, annual picnics out at Calverton.
Yeah, family day.
Yeah, and I can remember going out there one year as a young kid. I think I might have been 10 years old. And the family got in the car, went out there, and we certainly had never seen F-14s or EA-6Bs and all of that, and it was quite a day. And that's where it all started for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's, I don't want to say the average life of the Long Islander, but Grumman was that big of a company and Long Island was that small of a place. And, it's everybody knew somebody from Grumman. So,
the guys in my neighborhood, one of the guys at one street over was a plant manager at Calverton. You got to know the people your dad worked with, and they were all pretty solid guys, just good people.
Yeah, absolutely. So that made you grow up, obviously, knowing the word Tomcat. And with that, in Long Island, you found the idea, I guess, to want to be involved in aviation as an overall.
Yeah. The genesis of it was the picnic. I can describe to you watching, Tomcat perform. When the Tomcat did its flight performance, it was an A model, but he did a full burner vertical takeoff. And as a kid, you're looking at that, it was something to behold. And that sort of set the hook for me. I wanted to be a Navy fighter pilot. Fast forward, I go to college at St. John's, and I, started in one of the officer candidate programs, took the flight aptitude tests, was doing well, and then went to, I think, Fort Hamilton, Brooklyn. And like the first test in the physical was color blindness. I couldn't tell one number in all of the pastel colored cards they gave me, and that was the end of that. The Navy doesn't need colorblind fighter pilots.
Yeah, this is Siphon. I'm the Rio host here, and I remember that test. I remember one particular one that was like I was pretty unexactly sure about what it was. I didn't exactly guess, but I know what you mean. They're pretty tricky sometimes, right?
Yeah, I can remember it like yesterday. It was a bunch of us sitting next on a table, and they hand these out, and they're like, "Okay, what's a number?" And I'm like, "Number? There's no number." And they maybe gave me 5 of them. I couldn't tell one. And now I never felt I had color blinds. How would you know? It wasn't like a German Shepherd where everything was black and white, right? I think to this day I see a pretty vibrant world, but apparently there were very subtle hue differences. And you sit and say, well, what's that? Why do you need that? Well, if as a Rio, if you're in the groove and you're looking at the lens, the Fresnel lens, you better be able to tell the difference, right? Or
that's true.
Yeah, or if you're in an ACM hop, you've got to be able to see, especially with the camo schemes that are out there. You got to be able to discern an aircraft from the ground. And if you can't tell fine natural color differences, you're in bad shape. So that was that. That's just, and good for the Navy, right? They should be exacting. You shouldn't get in a Tomcat unless you're kind of the right stuff physically and mentally.
Yeah, you got to have it all together. It's a total package. Academics, especially. I mean, I think that's if you have everything else together, it's going to be academics, which is going to fine tune your career path. At least give you the options, the choices to say. Where if you just you're just cutting it, making it. I would assume that there's planes with propellers and stuff like that awaiting.
Well, the academics, I never got. I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say, well, I could have been a Tomcat pilot. I never got tested academically during the rigors of flight school, but having flown with these guys and seen Rios and pilots in action, you got to have your stuff together mentally. Getting through flight school, understanding all the math and the physics is not just for anybody on the street. So they're pretty exacting, and they should be. And I think that's part of why you look at the success our aviation units have in the last however many decades. That it's not just because they're great airplanes. You have great people with great tactics. So
you got great maintainers behind them, because when you talk about those physics and those planes come back and they're leaking everything out everywhere, it's the maintainers with the wrench, like Ken.
They're the unsung heroes of it, right? I mean, it's cool being the guy that gets in the cockpit, and that's great. But with the complexity of modern aircraft, the maintainers, that's a whole nother element of, like I said, unsung hero.
Yeah, absolutely. From college and failing the color blindness test, that had to be a dream killer, but somehow you would work your way around that. And I don't want to say the ace of spades up your sleeve, but you had some tricks to lay out on the table to say.
Well, yeah, and people ask me, when they look at my photography, they assume I'm a pilot. I'm not a pilot. They assume I was in the military. I was not in the military. They assume I have all these massive network connections, and I didn't. I just wanted to fly in airplanes, and I liked being around them. So I would drag my wife, who was then my girlfriend. We'd go to. I didn't go to a lot of air shows after the Grumman picnic, but I did a lot of standing outside of airbase fences. Oceana, Luke, Key West, you name it.
Yeah, we're all guilty of that.
Yeah, right. Now, back in the day, you could parlay some marginal photos over the fence to, maybe a magazine article or something like that, which I did. And I just slowly built on that. And, then I talked some of the people, the PAOs at Oceana, into letting me come on the base. And, in the 80s, I'm dating myself, but in the 80s, you could get away with things that you could never get away with now. For example, when I showed up at Oceana, and I had a little bit of credentials from publishing a magazine article or two, nothing crazy, but I said, look, I'm working on this project for this magazine. And they said, okay, well, here's a walkie-talkie. We'll drive you out to the middle of the runways and just call us when you're done. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? No. So I sat between Oceana's two main runways for hours.
Dream.
And they were true to their word. They just let me hang out there, and you're not going to get better photos than that.
No, they're like, he'll run out of film eventually.
Well, and I used to, yeah. And I just one thing led to another, and I managed to get a tanker ride in a KC-135, and after selling photos and doing articles for magazines, and back in those days, there was a lot of aviation magazines. There aren't so many today. But everybody was printing a combat aviation magazine, so you had a lot of places to try and take your stuff. I managed to talk Schiffer Publishing into letting me do a book on the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, and the military loves books. And the reason they love books and they love supporting me was for recruiting. If you promote the U.S. military positively, it helps recruiting, and they care about that. It's really that simple.
Yeah, it's a positive influence, honestly, and I don't see why.
And an all volunteer service, it sure is.
Yeah, absolutely. And turning that down would be, next steps: pull your wallet out to pay for a commercial if you're the Navy. If you want to up your recruiting, instead you can have good, hardworking people with quality content, delivering for them, and everybody wins in this scenario. You're getting to live an experience. Your magazine you're working for is getting a great product, and in the end, you're honoring the Navy as an overall.
Well, I don't think you need any more proof than the enduring benefits to naval aviation of the 1986 Top Gun movie. Right? The Navy was smart enough to say, hey, this could be cool. And not every service is like that. There are some. I think the Air Force tends to be far less flexible, I think, with those things.
Oh, come on. Iron Eagle's a great movie. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I guess, and I think those were Israeli Air Force fighters, right? But yeah, so and why is is Tom Cruise getting to fly in the back seat of a two-seat Super Hornet? Well, he's going to be Top Gun too, and these guys know the benefits of it.
So, not to make Leekster, we're joined by Leekster here. We have Siphon with us, our co-host, regular host, and we also have Ken from VF-14. He's here as well. We're another regular host, and but not to make all you guys jealous. I mean, we represent every single model tonight. We have, Leekster flew the A and the B, and Siphon flew the D, and Ken worked on the A and the D. So I think we cover all the bases tonight, but not to make these guys cringe. But Rick, you delivered some insane photos of Victory 103 and the Jolly Rogers and the Bones, and you put Fear the Bones in Fear the Bones with the photographs you took. They're spectacular. Every time you put one up, it's a smiling pleasure to share that with everyone. Honestly,
yeah.
I love the squadron. My dad was avionics a petty officer, and the air wing he was with flew F-8 Crusaders with the Jolly Rogers, and there's no cooler looking plane than a high visibility CAG bird Jolly Roger. Even a Super Hornet, it looks good in those colors. But I'm like, well, if I'm going to take pictures, I might as well, fleet gray schemes can be a little tough to jazz up. So I just happened to start to follow and work with the Jolly Rogers. And, through the years, they repainted their airplanes, it seemed to me, every cruise, right? Because some years they didn't have high visibility birds, it seemed to me, even the CAG bird.
I guess it would depend on the theater.
I guess. When I caught some lightning in a bottle later in my career, they were a few years away from retiring it. So they were very motivated to chronicle the aircraft. And I just saw an opportunity. And like I think I'd mentioned maybe previously, you know, I knew they were home based at Oceana. I connected with a company up in Williamsburg, I think, airport, that was flying Learjets and providing just some training, you know, not ACM training, but mostly training for surface warfare ships. But anyway,
Right.
I said, I got myself in one of them. I called up the CO at the Jolly Roger. I said, look, we're going to be in this area on this day. Would you show up? And again, back in, I'm simplifying matters, but back in the day with some work, you could pull that off. And up come these pair of F-14s. I think they were B models, I think, at the time, both in high vis. And I'm like, wow, it just doesn't get any better than that. And then I just kept shooting them. You know, if I knew they were doing a det somewhere, I'd find out what tanker unit they were flying with the Air Force, and I'd get on that airplane. And finally, it culminated with a backseat Hornet flight. They transitioned out, and they were doing I think an escort det at Fallon, and I got approval, grudgingly, to do a backseat hop, and I flew out, and we did a nice hop with a couple of their jets out at Fallon. You guys, you mentioned call signs. I might as well tell you, listeners, I got a call sign during that trip. Wasn't one I wanted, but
they really never are.
No, well, this one was. So my Navy call sign is Ralph, because I have a tendency to get airsick.
Right.
And when you're on a hot mic, which is always done with a civilian, so that they keep track of you back there. You know, I guess it wasn't the most flattering sounds. And, you know, this pilot said, "Hey, Ralph, how you doing back there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be all right." That actually, I should have my head examined, because I don't have the stomach for flying around in fighters. I get airsick all the time, but I like flying in airplanes just enough to put up with the airsickness. So.
Yeah, a claustrophobic environment with the canopy closed and the ultimate roller coaster ride across the sky.
And people say,
I think
yellow.
you'd be surprised how common that is. I remember guys in flight school that were getting sick every single flight in the A4 doing ACM training. And I mean, I was just amazed that these guys could fight an airplane and puke in a bag and then get their mask back on, and they would land, and they would do it day after day. And they just loved it so much that they would put up with it. And if people found out about that these days, you'd be washed out. And I think the Air Force gives their guys a few shots, and the Navy, if they find out you're airsick, they send you to the spin and puke, which was a vertigo-inducing simulator. And if you can't shake it, you're done. You know. But I knew guys that got sick quite often. So it's that love of aviation will push you through a lot of hardship.
People have said to me, "Geez, you know, it must be so much fun." And I'm like, well, you know, it's a be careful what you wish for scenario, because I find flying in the backseat of jet fighters a very visceral experience, and it's not all fun. You know, I'm a rational human being. When you go through the training, which is brief for a civilian, but it's pretty clear this is dangerous stuff. And then when you go through a brief, the pilot will say, "Look, if we do a bird strike and I'm incapacitated, here's what you have to do." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? What do you eject us? Can't I fly us home?" Which of course you get laughed at. But
there's no controls in the back of a Tomcat.
No, the problem is when I always felt, you know, if you're a photographer, imagine you're up flying, so you pull alongside a couple of jets. Now, we'll be flying form off them, which means there's a little more stick and throttle and movement. So I take away my entire vision, because I'm looking through a camera, through a piece of glass at a moving object, from a moving object. And that, I would defy most people to make it through that without taking a second look at their lunch. You know, that's it's just not an easy experience. You can get used to it. Some guys can handle it. But I tell people, and you guys know, you haven't experienced motion till you get in a fighter jet. It's just And it is claustrophobic when the canopy comes down. You got the mask on, and you're in an ejection seat with very little movement. It's not for the faint of heart. If everything goes
or a long
right,
mission.
If everything goes right, it's fun. I mean, my rear end was good for about 45 minutes before that ejection seat just started to feel like I was on concrete.
So you're good for 45 minutes of the 90-minute flight, which is excellent, right?
If it's not comfortable.
That's funny. Hey, in a final question, we don't want to keep you too long. You mentioned during the transition stage for you, you had an opportunity to sit in the Super Hornet in the back seat. Now, we know that aircraft has dual controls.
Well, some of them.
Yeah, some of them on the F model and the trainer model.
Right, you got to be an FT,
model.
yeah.
Yeah. You had a chance to fly them, I believe?
I did. So I've flown, with the Air Force models, they all have, except for the Strike Eagle, the back seat will have, a stick and whatnot, which presents problems for a photographer because, you got to make sure you don't hit it.
Yep.
Right? And, I carry two cameras, so I have a pretty large camera bag. The F-16, the F-18 are very small cockpits. They're very ergonomic, very tight. An F-18D, or a B model does have a stick. And I've asked pilots, I'm like, look, it's an obligatory question. We're up here. I'm not going to do this every day. Can I try it? And it's pretty cool. It's not as hard as you think just to turn, make left. You're not deploying weapons and I'm no pilot, but the F-16 is a little trickier because it has a digital side stick controller and you don't get the stick doesn't move much. It's all pressure. So that's weird. The Tomcat actually is cool. Yeah, the Tomcat's great to fly in because in the back seat it's roomy, has a great air conditioner, so it's
loud air conditioner too.
The things that matter.
Yeah, but flying fighter jets, I did just enough of it to regale my kids with gee, Dad's cool. But believe me, these guys that fly it, the Rios, the pilots that employ those weapons and these aircraft, man, they are really good. And it takes a while to become that good.
Well, let me turn it back to you for just a second. I don't know if Leekster had the same experience, but I've looked back and I've seen some photos that I remember seeing when I was in high school, college time frame that you took that were part of the reason why I already kind of knew I wanted to go to Tomcat. But it's honestly part of the artisticness of those pictures was part of the reason why I wanted to go Tomcat. So it takes a special person to be able to do that too. So thanks very much for making our community look good.
Well, thank you. And because look, there are many better photographers than me, and some great guys that can pull G's and go vertical and inverted. I couldn't really do that. My goal was to get photos and to land. That was what I wanted to do. And so I had to kind of come up with more creative ways to make the airplanes and the photos look good, given my physical limitations. Which is why I do a lot of flights in tankers. They're not as cool as being in the back seat, but you know what? You can walk around, you can go to the bathroom, you can eat lunch, and it's comfortable. And if you do it right, you can get some great pictures. So I'm glad you like them. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really did appreciate it. And and obviously I'm not a professional photographer, but I can clearly understand a blue sky backdrop versus a gray F-14 Tomcat isn't much to work with color-wise, and you bring it to life yet, and so it's an honor. Thank you. Definitely appreciate your work.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Appreciate everything. And thank you again for calling, and you have a great night.
Anytime.
All right, that was Rick Llinarres, photographer that spent a lot of time with VF-103 and also a childhood at Grumman here on Long Island with his dad, as he said, as an executive, and it was kind of a good experience and a great background behind him, and thought it was something good that we can all share. It's cool. Speaking of cool, it's cool to have our friend Ken back. VF-14 Tophatters, maintainer. He had surgery, so he missed the first show, and he's back now, and he's looking good. He's got a big old smile on his face right now, and we're excited to have him with us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back finally.
Absolutely. Very cool. And again, you know you personally as a friend, but beyond that, it's exciting to know that you're part of the alpha model F-14 and the A with the Tophatters, and you sunsetted that. And also to know that with the Delta model, a D, with the Tomcatters, Siphon Squadron, you guys, incredible job. Day one, I guess, out of high school, when did you join the Navy?
I graduated high school in 1995. Just had a handful of jobs here and there. I ended up going to take the ASVAB in 1998. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus to the MEP station up in Albany. Then onto an airplane to Great Lakes out in Chicago for boot camp. After I graduated boot camp, I went to the Aviation Machinist Mate A School down in Pensacola, Florida, which, by the way, they have a constant every morning alarm clock of the Blue Angels ripping over the barracks bright and early every morning. So thank you to them. And after A School, I went to VF-14. That was my first squadron. Within a week and a half of getting there, we were on a boat detachment for workups for a cruise on the Roosevelt, which I believe Eric was with the Black Aces at the time.
Well, I was actually on the ship. Yeah.
Okay, so
and he was on board with you, same time, same cruise.
Yep. So like I said, I joined. I was a top hatter for a week and a half. Didn't even have my bags unpacked yet, and right out on the boat, which is for anybody that doesn't know, just being on an aircraft carrier alone is incredible. And it's just an eye-opening experience all around. Just from
Very
the different
busy
schedules to how everything's done. And, we did the workup. I believe it was maybe a month and a half at the most. Came back for a few weeks, then out to Fallon and cruise again.
Roger that. You guys, when you were out on the Roosevelt, something we were curious about, I was telling Leekster about this a little earlier, was that you had a sister squadron, and only one of you guys were TARP certified. I believe it was your squadron, 14, that didn't have any TARP pods. And
yeah, well, it was us and 41, the Black Aces.
Oh, I say, Black Aces.
And,
remember, together it's VF-55.
Yeah. And, I can never recall seeing a VF-14A model with a TARP spot. It was always the Black Aces that were carrying them.
Yeah, we thought that was interesting. It must have been a budget decision based on that, because after 95, any squadron that wasn't TARPs was basically retired, put away. And all the TARPs airframes continued on. So it was kind of interesting to know that on your guys' when you sunsetted the F-14A, that you weren't bringing TARPs pods, which it kind of matches with Siphon on his last cruise, that for budget reasons they decided not to bring the Phoenix with them. Go get the job done on its final cruise without it.
Looking back on it, I never really realized that, and until me and you were talking that one night, and it just popped in my head that I can never recall a top hatter plane taking off with a tar spot.
Yeah,
ever.
That was a long cruise too. That cruise, it was beyond 6 months. I think that was like a 7.5 month cruise.
Yeah, it was a little bit longer just because of Kosovo, everything like that, and my second cruise with the Tophatters on the Enterprise was pushed pretty far because of September 11th. So I didn't have the best luck with always returning on time.
You had some detaches with Fallon, you said, and I'm assuming that was at that point you should have lantern pod, and I guess that was air to ground work. Squadron.
Yep. Well, yeah, the air crews would do, air to ground, everything.
So what's that like? You pack up out of Oceana and, personal effects, load up and...
Yeah, just pack a couple of bags. You pack up your shop with, spare parts, tools, just like you were going on cruise. And you pretty much you're like a nomad. You pretty much just move around. And
Fallon has housing for you?
For a while.
And Ken, were you an airframe guy, or is that what you were primarily doing, or what was your normal maintenance that you were asked to do?
Well, I was rated as an AMH before they combined the AMHs and AMSs together. Aviation Machinist Mate Hydraulic, Aviation Machinist Mate Structural.
Okay.
The Navy ended up combining the two rates and just making the AM rate.
Did they put you as like a crew chief? I mean, were you a brown shirt first or anything like that, or you went right into just turning wrenches, or what did that look like?
I went straight to the airframe shop. I did my first cruise, pretty much all of it in the airframe shop. The last 2 months, I got sent TAD down to the mess decks.
Oh, you get to crank too! Yay!
Yeah, which was it was a bummer, but my second cruise with the Tophatters, I was a second class, and I was running the shooter shack at night.
Wow. Okay. Did you? I'm just curious. I hate to jump in here, guys, but I'm always curious what you guys saw, because we would bring airplanes back with D-lams and rivets popped and all kinds of panels missing occasionally. I mean, I saw some overstresses. I remember one guy in Fallon one time doing a Sam Jink down low hauling the mail, and he put like 11 G's on the airplane and busted one of the motor mounts. So. I mean, we could bring back some airplanes in some pretty sorry shape. So you must have seen a few things like that while you're doing that, right?
Yeah, I mean, D-lams, I mean, especially the age of the Tomcat, D-lams were pretty prevalent. Most of your rivets that were popping were intake rivets, just because of the force that the nacelles had to take and everything. As far as like the structural skin, the fasteners held up great. There was, cam lock fasteners. There was all different types, and obviously they were strategically placed on the aircraft to take the certain loads.
I was always impressed with the airframe, and you'll never hear a Tomcat pilot that doesn't talk about the infamous or famous, if you will, titanium box beam, which was the main structure. I mean, the fact that those wings could sweep and stay on the airplane with the kind of weights and G loads that we were putting on them is just astounding to me. I mean, that was an incredible piece of technology that Grumman put together there. So.
Yeah, it was just amazing, like altogether. Just if you look at the jet as a whole, just the way it operated. It wasn't fly by wire. It was all push pull rods and series servos, and it was just amazing just to see the way if you pulled the panels back on the hump and you just saw what was crammed in there.
It was just like
pictures out there. I loved seeing those panels off. Like when you were up in the that overlook in the hangar bay, where you could see down on the top of the jets, and you sometimes had that spine off. I was like, man, this thing is complicated, and it was really
and if you think about it, it's a very simple system. It was just augmented in so many places. It was you could really compare it to like a Piper Warrior that's the yokes attached to the elevator, and it's all wires, and the Tomcat was the same. It was push pull rods that would open and close solenoids that would give
hydraulic airframe
the power. Yeah, it was simplistic, but just the way they built that thing was amazing.
Yeah, I always think about when that spine covers off and you take a look back there and you see, all the plumbing, the electrical wiring, the linkage pull rods, like he's saying, all the throttle stuff. And I think about guys like Siphon and Leekster giving that final salute on the Cat. And they're going down the Cat right now, and you just can't get that vision out of your mind. And the engineering of what you're looking at is second to none, that it works cohesively. It works in union. It's like music. The jet just goes. And for as complicated as it is, for the minimum, I don't want to say minimum that it broke a lot for as complicated as it was. But when you really break down, the amount of parts into this airplane and how much it worked together in harmony, actually a pretty good record for what it was. Compared to,
I would say in the early 90s, the thing we had the most I felt bad for the guys that were working on them was the torque tubes in the slats.
Oh, right.
And I know because there's a live wing, and those some guys would spin that little wheel on the stick, or we got a lot of folks were pulling the alpha breaker so that they wouldn't they had manual control over the slats, but quite often those torque tubes would break, and that was always a bummer,
when they locked out.
Yeah, lockout for the flaps and slats.
Yeah, flap slat lockout. Yeah, those weren't easy.
We were at an air show at Norfolk in about 1997, and 101 sent an airplane over from Oceana to do the demo. About a quarter of the way through the demo, he just climbed out. He circled for a minute, and then he came over the radio and let everyone know he had a flat block out, and he's headed back to Oceana. And that was your F-14 demo for the day.
I got to spend a couple good nights in Kuwait because of that.
I got to go to Sigonella during the Super Bowl, and, the ship was, and me and my Rio were the only ones that got to drink beers and watch the Super Bowl live because we had a busted slat lockout. So I guess it could be a good deal.
Now, was this pre-planned?
I had to fly back to the ship in the cod, and that was one of the scariest things I ever did.
All right, so if we put the flaps out and we accelerate to 400 knots, we can go back to Sigonella and go watch the game. Otherwise, we're headed to the boat. Yeah, Leekster, put the flaps out. Go for it.
Well, they wouldn't let us land. They couldn't get. I was on an oiler. I was on the America. It was on a nuke. They couldn't get enough wind over the deck, so we had no option. We had to go to. We had to divert. That was something.
Yeah, that's funny. So Ken, you sunsetted the F-14A with the Tophatters, and from there, your career transfers you on. It brings you to the D model F-14D with the Tomcatters in 31. I guess a big question we would all have for you is, as a maintainer, what's the difference between the F-14A and the F-14D? Say, standing there with a wrench, they're both broken.
They both leak a lot, but as far as airframes wise, there wasn't really much of a difference. It was a couple of servos were in different spots, a couple of check valves, just nothing major. It's almost identical if you put the two side by side. For an airframe standpoint, obviously, the ADs it was different for them. Two different types of engines. ATs, it was
avionics suite.
Totally different. As Eric could tell you, and as far as an airframer, it's basically the same. As a final tracker, it was the same. You look at the same stuff.
Main differences was you had mentioned the hydraulic pump, actually, for the combined hydraulics was in a different area on the F-110 versus the TF-30. They had relocated.
Yeah, it was just on the inboard side, which on the TF-30s they were on the outboard sides. Same panel, same sponson, just on the inboard side. But
so pull the engines out. We're working with the same airframe, minus the avionics package in it, being D package APG-71 radar versus the AWG-9 radar. Again, that's what the thing was with the upgrade with the F-14. And Grumman really tried on their end to not just upgrade the avionics suite in the airplane. They wanted to go through the maintenance on the airplane and fix the problems that were very occurring, like the flap and slat lockout and, a lot of hydraulic, leaks and nose gear steering leaks. And ironically, I believe that was on the last Tomcat to taxi out at sunset at 2006, which you guys siphoned. Didn't that airplane go out to the end of the runway and decide it wasn't going flying? They had to send a backup out for the sunset?
Yep, that's true.
So, again, Grumman tried to go out on a limb and say, hey, we're going to give you a digital Tomcat and we're going to fix a lot of this maintenance issues. And the Navy selected to go for it and build the Super Tomcat, but budgets on it would restrict it down to just, selecting certain things that they wanted, and that being the APG-71 radar, not so much going after the maintenance on the airplane. I guess at that point, they kind of felt they had it under control by 83, 84. They understood what they were working with. Started in 1971. So, major difference in the F-14D and the F-14A really was just an avionics package. And I guess seats and stuff. I mean, there's a little bit more to go into, obviously. But airframe for airframe, it's how they talk about with remanufacturing and how you're able to turn an A into a D. And it's nothing more than, slip the engines out and pull out the avionics and reinstall all new stuff, rewire it all, and send it out the door as an F-14DR, R meaning remanufactured. So yeah, that's cool. It's a pretty cool career, and so you're not working on Tomcats anymore, and retired
not
now.
anymore.
What are you up to nowadays?
I am actually a firefighter in New York City, currently for the past 13 years.
His service continues. This is awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for your service. Honestly, it's again, it doesn't end with just the Navy. It continues on, and being a firefighter is obviously it's not an easy job. When everyone's running the other way, you're running to it.
Yeah, it's not not everybody's cut out for it, and you take it day by day, run by run, and you make the best of it.
Yeah. You have kids?
I do. I have two little boys, Matthew and Eric. One's 3, and one is 18 months.
Oh, nice. 2 little
Good
guys.
names. Good names.
Yeah, it's Eric with a K. Eric with a K, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, you're wrong with that.
That's great. I appreciate it. That's really, really cool story, and thank you for sharing that with us. And
Yeah.
it's awesome to have you aboard as a host. Something we've been looking forward to for a while, and surgery, a little setback. So it's good to have you aboard. Definitely.
Yeah, I'm good to be back finally.
We're going to pick back up with our first show here for a few minutes. And Siphon, this was something we left off with, and that was the F-14D Super Tomcat versus the F-22 Raptor. Before we get into that, I have just in front of me, I went over to Lockheed Martin here and pulled up some specs real quick on their baby so that we have some accurate information to work with. And what I'm looking at, they must be lying because the Tomcat is claimed to be a heavy airplane, a large airplane. Well, I want to mention that the Raptor comes in at a gross weight of 83,000 pounds, 83,500 maximum takeoff. That's a big girl.
Really heavy.
Yeah.
That's really.
But it backs it, though, with the Pratt & Whitney engines, and they're producing 35,000 pounds of thrust each, and that is SR-71 Blackbird power at that level. That in a fighter, not in a big Blackbird, and it's what gives this thing the ability to super cruise, and that means no afterburner. The Air Force admits, Lockheed Martin in front of me right here admits 1.8 and the top speed Mach 2 plus. That's pretty funny for an airplane like that to plug the burner in and just get a little more than 1.8 out of it. But so we're going to go with the reality of this thing and understanding physics. This thing super cruises at over Mach 2. And so here we are with 55,000 feet in the Raptor. We're super cruising. We're looking at the radar screen. We got the jet turned down low and we're sniffing. And lo and behold, on the radar, I find this big Greyhound bus with party banners on the side with big sirens on the roof, flashing with pistols shooting out the window like cowboys. And lo and behold, it's Felix 101 with Siphon in the back seat, and he's got the Erst. Why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, so we went up for a series of 2v2s because they were just over the water across the bay from us, basically flying out of Langley. And so they hooked up some dissimilar aircrew training with us. As far as I understand, it was the first and only time the Tomcats flew against the Raptors. We had a series of flights, so I don't think everybody got to, but a lot of us did. So we did some really long sets. I don't know if, for those of you who aren't familiar, a set meaning like we'll set up at like about 100 miles away or something like that.
Off the nose.
What's that?
Off the nose? Separation distance?
You kind of know where you're looking generally. They're coming from the northeast corner of the box, and you're coming from the southwest corner of the box, kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Box being a box of airspace we're working in, and so you're searching. They're designed not to be seen by radar, but of course, what they don't know, at least when they're first searching, is what kind of aircraft you are. Now that changes pretty rapidly if you're searching with radar, but they don't necessarily know what you got on board too. And one of the neatest things I think that Grumman and the Navy did was to put an Erst, and it's an infrared search and track dome right next to the TCS on the chin pod of a Tomcat. And that dome, we still can't talk about exactly what it did, but basically it searched in infrared, like the name says it does, and we could see a really long way with that thing. And it's infrared, which means that you're looking at beyond the visual range of beyond the visual capability of our eyes, and it's tracking aircraft, or it's tracking what it thinks is aircraft, or something along those lines. So our tactics are such that trying to make sure I don't say anything wrong. Keep me honest here, Leekster. Our tactics are such that you're not always pointing at the thing you're intercepting. Let's put it just that way. And so we could actually, one of the neat things about the D model Tomcat is we could slave, meaning like we could tell one particular sensor to be the master and the others to point down that same line of bearing. And normally we flew around with the radar as the master because of course it can see lots of stuff. But suddenly if you know your threat out there is a stealth aircraft like the F-22 is, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have your long range, like your longest range piece of gear not doing anything. And so make the Earth the master. And then the radar is able to get a good piece of data about where I should be looking. And you can really, you're not exactly in a single target track, but you're able to search in a very tight field. And with that, it actually made it more of a fair fight. Now, we're talking long distance here. If we were carrying Phoenix, we could shoot a lot farther than they can because
So basically,
Phoenix is a great piece of gear.
I'm cruising along at Mach 2 in my F-22 with my liquid cooled leading edges on the airframe, hiding my heat signature, and for some strange reason, my gauges, my dashboard is lighting up in the jet, telling me that I'm being looked at right now. And normally, that's not the way an F-22 works in its environment. It works in silence. It comes down from above. It like a eagle getting little rabbits on the ground, and those rabbits are F-16s, F-50. He's able to come up with solutions without you even knowing he's there. You end up just getting over the radio call in your helmet, Viper 2, you're dead. You didn't even know you died. You didn't even, what do you mean? How did I die? I didn't, there's no warning. But this time, what makes it different is with the F-14D, like you said, with the Erst, he now is not flying his normal offensive routine. His eyebrow, as we said, is raised, and he has to some respect you, and he's got to go on a defensive.
Yeah, so we're not going to be able to turn against an F-22. I mean, honestly, we did. I mean, we fought it. It was fun. But we're going to lose every time there. They're much more maneuverable in a dogfight. I mean, as long as they're well piloted.
It's a whole scenario that plays out at the BVR distance, like you said, from each end of the box to if you don't get your solution, well, that merge is just getting endlessly closer. The closer you get to that merge, the less fuel he has, and the less fuel he has, the more his thrust to weight ratio comes up. Same thing with the Tomcat, but the Tomcat doesn't become 1-to-1 until she's really down low, even with the F-110s. So you got to get down a half a tank or less. The F-22 being 1.1 plus to say, the closer you get with him at the merge, the more chances of you not having a good outcome just get higher to say.
It does. And again, we're talking, this is a theoretical thing anyway. We're never going to fight F-22s, and honestly, no one else in the world has F-22s, so that's great for us. but it was a fun exercise to be able to do, to come down. We didn't talk to him after. We didn't meet together for the debrief in the same place. We just talked to him on the phone, and it was interesting to hear their reaction to when we started tracking them. They were honestly a little surprised, I think.
That's what I'm saying by raising eyebrow.
I suspect that probably changed their tactics a little bit, which is partly what we were designed those exercises to do.
Similar air combat training.
Yeah, they needed to understand. They needed to get some good data about what some other. I mean, Erst is a good piece of gear, but other countries could implement that.
Yeah, today it's pretty popular actually. Most modern fighters are equipped.
Yeah, so they needed to be aware of where that was really going to play out for them in their timeline.
Eric, when you're just interrupt you real fast for anybody that's listening that hears you referring to the Erst pod, can you kind of let them know the difference between the Erst pods on the D models and the TCS on the A models?
Yeah, so on the A plus, I guess it was A plus when they first got the TCS, right? And then the Bs, that chin pod, chin pod right under the radome, basically, there's a TCS. On the D, we actually had a side-by-side thing where the TCS was on looking forward on the starboard side, and the Erst was on the port side. They're basically the same diameter, and there's like a couple tubes sticking there under the radome. And so we could actually, as I'm talking to Slavin here, so we would make this kind of an intercept, we would make the Erst a primary sensor, and it would slave the TCS and the radar, and if we had it, the lantern pod to all of that. And so all of those are looking down that same line of bearing. So we could see some visual, we could see some lantern infrared, we could see some radar. It was a really, really neat system to have that all interconnected on a digital architecture bus.
Would the the airborne self-protection jammer, would that have any use against a stealth dogfight to say?
ASPJ was mostly an air-to-surface jammer.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, air-to-ground masking.
Right. Yeah, and I could talk about that maybe another time about what we got some good feedback on that.
What about a prowler? What about a prowler on your wing? Dealing with an F-22. I mean, I know it increases the whole signature times a million, but does that not have enough power? And it could shut down Connecticut. How can that not shut an F-22 down?
when you got the clown car next to you,
but it's on our
that's
time.
a good thing to have. But basically, the noise jamming that they do, and F-22 is not going to be able to burn through that.
Again, it's on our side, so that kind of training really doesn't actually take place. We don't really fight each other. We train more or less how to work together. And that's the difference. And Leekster sitting over there, he's cringing because he wants to know why there's no end model F-22 and where's the tail hook in the damn Rio and what's going on here. Why didn't we navalize this? I had to go to the Hunters and Fly old days.
I'm with Siphon. I'm glad they're on our side. I can tell you that the experiences that I've debriefed on the F-22, it's a magic piece of gear. And but I don't think a lot of people realize how old that thing is now. I mean, that thing was, built in the 80s, so it's still the top dog out there, but they're going to have some new stuff coming pretty quick. But that thing is absolutely
it's matured quite well.
Piece of gear for an air-to-air weapon system. Everybody is afraid of it. I can guarantee you that.
Oh,
and just like when they were afraid of us when we were out there with the Phoenix, nobody wanted to fight us with the Phoenix. We would fight the guys out of Langley all the time, the F-15 guys, and they would say, hey, aim sevens only.
Right.
So now you're taking away.
Make it a fair fight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no data link. Everybody knows hot. We don't want 3 cold F-14s on the deck with one up top hot this way so that they're all feeding data link down below and then they all rise up. None of the rules of engagement were never fair with the Tomcat at the range. I never understood that.
No, it was a very intimidating weapon system, and right now the F-22 is the intimidating weapon system that's out there. And the F-35 is a completely different concept on how it works, in the net-centric environment.
Yeah.
And it's another leap forward in technology. It's not designed to be an F-22. And the reason the F-22 is so heavy is because they want to be really invisible and they carry all their fuel internal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why it ends up being that heavy.
It's the same empty weight as the Tomcat. It's 43,000 pounds. It's the same thing. However, it takes another 10,000.
Imagine you were trying to stuff those external tanks inside of an airplane, right? And that's what it ends up looking like with that size of an airframe.
In Tomcat 21, they were going to blow up the glove vein areas to hold more internal fuel in it. This way, so they could start to steer away from those tanks.
We had a lot of gas. 20,000 pounds of fuel in a fighter plane is a lot of fuel. I mean, most of the time we ran most airplanes out of gas. I can tell you that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. But speaking of that, Jerry Leekey, call sign Leekster, VF-102 Diamondbacks. A proud career, and you were in it at a great time, honestly, and that's why I say that because the 80s and the word Grumman F-14 in the United States Navy, and you got to fly it all the way out to around 2000. And where and how did this all start for you? Where did you get the idea that you wanted to fly?
I was a lucky guy. My dad was actually he was a mechanic. He was an engines mechanic in the Air Force, and then he later became an airline pilot. So I grew up around airplanes, and my first jobs were working on ramp, pumping gas, and towing airplanes around and doing maintenance. And then I started flying in high school, and I had like an instrument rating basically when I went in the Navy. Well, at that time in the 80s, this is really interesting, I think. They had a program called the Naval Aviation Cadet Program that came out very briefly. And that was a program they had in World War II. George Bush, senior president, was a NAVCAD in World War II. And the requirements were that you had to have 2 years or the equivalency of an associate's degree. You did not have to have a bachelor's degree. And it was really designed as kind of a Mustang program for enlisted guys to go to OCS and become pilots. The only difference between that and a Mustang or a flying chief, as they had for a while, is that you were an unrestricted line officer and you were never required to get a bachelor's degree. And they had this program during Vietnam. They had it in Korea, World War II. And some of the guys that had flown in Vietnam made it up to flag level, and they decided to start this program during the big Reagan push, with the 600 ship Navy thing. Mm-hmm. So a few guys like me just got lucky and went out and applied and unfortunately, I got turned down a couple times, and you had to wait 6 months to reapply. And I just kept at it. And then one day they called me on a Monday and said, when can you be in Pensacola? I said, how about Friday? So 5 days later, I was in Pensacola going to through
awesome.
officer candidate school, and it was off to the races. And fortunately for me, with a little bit of extra, flight time when I went through flight school, I did pretty well. So, of course, the great equalizer is when you go from flying a Cessna 172 to getting in an A4 Skyhawk and trying to land it on an aircraft carrier. It's a real eye opener, right? And so that took some getting used to. And then just out of my class, my winging class, I got lucky and got the F-14, which was my first choice. I was absolutely thrilled to get that slot, and so I went off to Oceana. And
I was going to say, how many of your class went Tomcats?
I don't think. I'm trying to remember, but I don't believe there was any other Tomcat guy.
Okay.
A couple guys got F-18s, which is what they wanted as their first choice, and then a few guys ended up getting Sturgrad, which is a selectively retrained graduate, which they stay in the training command as a flight instructor for 2 years, which is really disheartening as after you've busted your butt for 2 years of flight school to have to stay there as a flight instructor in Meridian, Mississippi, or Beeville or Kingsville or whatever. And then a few guys got A6s, and we had some Marines, of course, so there's some Harriers and Hornets over there too. And just serendipitously, two of the guys in my winging class that got Hornets ended up in the same air wing as me, and we all went to Desert Storm together. So it was pretty cool. I'm sorry, four guys. Another guy ended up in A6s. So four of us ended up in the same air wing, and we were all very close friends by that point. So it was really a kick to go on deployment with the same guys that I went through training with. And
that's cool.
Yeah, it was neat. I showed up in Oceana, and what was it? I got winged in July of '89, and then tailhook '89 was in August. I went off to tailhook, and then showed up at the RAG in September, and I don't think we actually got started until January or February or something. So we had a few months of kicking around.
Real quick, I just want to
Oceana.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to jump in because we had mentioned I got a big kick out of this. When you first got winged and you showed up at the RAG, I remember you telling me that you guys were loaded up and flown out to Grumman, Calverton.
That was funny because, what they'll do with you is they'll stick a bunch of people in a pool. And at that time, poor guys on the West Coast were having to wait a year to get started in the RAG. And on the East Coast, they didn't have as much of a backup. We just had 3 months or whatever. But yeah, we were all standing around, hanging out on the beach and doing whatever we wanted. And then one day they called and said, we need a few volunteers, and you just volunteered to get on a C9 and wear your whites up in Calverton for the D rollout. And I was thrilled. I'm a nut like all of us on this thing. I was a complete nut about aviation. I was actually shocked that there were guys that I flew with in the Navy that didn't know the difference between a P-51 and a Learjet, and when they started. Wow. And I was just crazy about airplanes. So to go to the D rollout was a real honor for me. And I had never been to New York State even, let alone to Long Island or Calverton.
By D rollout.
So
yeah, by D rollout, you mean is the fleet acceptance ceremony at Grumman, Calverton for the first F-14D Tomcat to roll off the line to give to the Navy.
Can you imagine? I mean, we were pinching ourselves, at least I was. So we go up there and they treated us like royalty. We're in our whites and we're almost like celebrities. We're the F-14 pilots. None of us have ever even sat in the darn simulator yet. And we're being treated like we're big, fighter pilot heroes, and they're giving us little gifts and stuff. And we all got to sit in the D and watch the flight. But what we were talking about was that I had watched all these shows about the F-14 and the development and how the F-111 failed and Admiral Tom Connolly and how he really drove that program through Congress to get it done. And he was there, and he was like a celebrity for me. To see this guy was, like meeting Neil Armstrong. I had to go straight up to him and I was like a fanboy, you know. I was just, Admiral Connolly, I've always, you know, thank you,
like
sir.
all nervous.
You know, I'm so honored to get chosen to fly this airplane, and that you were the guy that made it happen. And he was just an older gentleman at that time, so it was like talking to your grandpa, you know. And he patted me on the shoulder and shook my hand and said, "Well, you're going to have a lot of fun, you know, enjoy it." So
yes,
that
you
was
did.
pretty neat.
Yeah, that's a great story.
You got the "That's nice, son." That's nice, son. Thanks a lot.
Exactly.
That is a pretty neat thing to be able to have been there for. I seriously would have loved that. I know Lorenzo would have too, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I was there for that day. I think I was, but I don't think I was allowed on the grounds that day. So I think I was across the street in my Trans Am with the T-tops off, cheering as it went over as usual.
Well, so you went through Grim Reapers, the F-101, back in Oceana. How long did that take for you? Normal pipeline for you, pretty much, after you finally got started?
It's about 6 or 7 months, and you know, I had just like you, I'm sure. You know, when I walked out to the airplane for the first time to actually fly it, I had imposter syndrome. I was walking up to this machine that was like a spaceship to me, you know, as a kid, and I could not get it into my head that they were going to actually let me fly this thing. You know, I thought any minute now while I'm pre-flighting, some guy's going to come up to me and tap me on the shoulder and go, we made a mistake, not you, you know.
Wait, who do you think you are? What are you doing, right?
And Ken's like, just don't break the plane. Just please don't break the plane while you have it. I got stuff to do this weekend.
I had that exact same experience. I know exactly what you're talking about. And you, of course, that first couple flights, you fly with an instructor pilot, not instructor Rio, right?
I think it was the first 2 flights. I believe it was the first 2 flights, and the instructor that I flew with ended up being in my squadron for 2 deployments. After he left the RAG, we kind of got there at the same time, and we became, you know, kind of lifelong friends. So it was just weird that I got to have my first flight with this guy who's a terrific guy, Dave Pine, Conus is his call sign, and he was just nice as pie, you know, treated me great as an instructor, and we had a great time. And when you fly that airplane the first few times, and even later, the impression is that, you know, we called it the flying tennis court, right? 64 feet long and 64 feet wide, or whatever, 63 feet wide, and you're really sitting in that cockpit looking around all the way back through the tails. Some of us called the MiG spotters. Where's the bogey?
Did anyone ever yell over the radio, "Tennis, anyone?" At the merge?
It was a big jet, you know, so it was pretty neat to sit in there and look around at it when you're at altitude. So that was a real kick. And
so got all the way through the RAG, and of course back then there was no air to ground syllabus, so all focused air to air, right?
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing, because we were some of the last folks to go through the RAG as straight air-to-air guys. And, you know, the F-14 guys kind of strutted around like they were, the instructors, of course. I mean, we were all, pretty proud to be flying this thing. But, you know, hey, we're the big badass Phoenix shooters, right? Nobody can touch us. We're a big air-to-air fighter plane. So it was interesting that almost, immediately after I got in the fleet, that we started wanting to strap bombs on the thing and go through a whole nother training syllabus. So it was, and we had to teach ourselves, we really were kind of, a RAG guy would come over and give a lecture, and we had to learn all the weaponeering and all the low level penetration stuff and all the things that the A6 guys, got a whole RAG course on. We were basically teaching ourselves how to do.
You would have lasted the F-14 air to air.
Interesting. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, you basically were making up the syllabus as you went through it, kind of thing. It's a challenging thing. I suspect, like the the East Coast Weapons Squadron also was probably pretty involved with that too.
SWAT slant came later. We didn't have that at that time. What really kind of got it turbocharged was when the A6s started to go away, and they started bringing some of the A6 guys over into the F-14. and they really had the the air to mud expertise that kind of, and that was just before the Lantern Pod came, but they brought a real wealth of experience on that kind of stuff. Most of those guys couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag, though. It took them a while to learn how to do ACM, which is equally challenging, right? And they didn't,
right.
So that's a whole nother mission. And now you're trying to do tarps, air to ground, air to air. And now you're taking on, as a multi-mission guy, and the F-18 guys are very familiar with, the whole, jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. So it gets a little interesting at that point, trying to stay qualified and all that stuff.
Yeah, indeed. So you told us a little bit about a story of when you left for Iraq the first time, back in the 91 time frame, 90-91 time frame.
Right.
They were doing some CQ, some carrier quals. So they had the LSO on board. And tell us about what happened there.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. So we had this. So we were plussing up to go to the war. I was the youngest, newest guy, and we were going to Desert Storm. Everybody's like, "We're going to Iraq. Or you better be ready to go to war." And we were like, "Wow, is this really going to happen?" And so they brought in a couple extra folks on every squadron, because I think they were kind of expecting losses. I think they told us we were going to lose 15% or something is what they were expecting on the way over. Fortunately, it didn't work out that way. But so we got a few extra folks, and they needed a carrier qual, right? So we left port in the beginning of January, right after New Year's, and we were out there trying to CQ off the coast of Norfolk. Well, it was taking too long, so they said, "Well, we're going to head over to Spain." Well, one of the RAG LSOs needed to be on the ship to qualify these guys. So they said, "Well, he was only going out for 2 days to qualify these folks." So the guy had a flight suit and a T-shirt and underwear and socks. That was it. And all of a sudden, this guy finds himself off the coast of Spain, doing LSO stuff. And we were laughing because I was a really junior guy. I was an ensign, believe it or not, because of the NAVCAD program.
Wow.
And so this guy was in my 8-man stateroom. This poor lieutenant commander stuck in an 8-man stateroom with a bunch of knucklehead JOs, right? And so we're laughing, and we couldn't get called off of Spain. The weather was just horrible, and it was so they couldn't CQ again. Well, we got to get over to the Red Sea, so we start trucking across the Med. Next thing you know, we're in the Red Sea, and the balloon goes up, and it's, "Hey, we're going to war tomorrow." And this guy is still with us, and he's come all the way from the bag with his one flight suit and his one T-shirt, and he's all the way in the Red Sea and finds himself flying cap missions in Desert Storm, and he stayed with us for about a month, and then they finally sent him home. And I understood. I heard later, and I heard at the time, that a lot of the RAG guys were just really burned over that. They were, you figure a RAG instructor's done a 3-year fleet tour, maybe he's a Top Gun graduate. They've dreamed of an opportunity to go to combat, and one guy gets to do it out of the RAG, right? And right. There he was with us. And,
in his one flight suit. Did they at least get him an extra tan flight suit?
We didn't get tan flight suits until about a day after the ceasefire, which was hilarious. But
funny.
Yeah, so we're all, you had guys flying in chocolate chips, the regular Army fatigues, because they thought, here you're wearing this green torso harness and you're going to end up in the desert in a big parachute and you're going to hide in because you're wearing some chocolate chips. I didn't really think that was going to save your life, but
and they're not exactly Nomex either, so yeah.
and we had, at that time, we had that little 38 pistol, and I'm like, I'm tossing this thing in the chute, because the last thing I want to do is get in a gunfight with a bunch of guys with AK-47s with my little snub-nosed 38, and then we didn't have GPS on the survival. We had the old crummy survival radios, and we didn't get any of that stuff until right after the war ended. And then all of a sudden we got the supply chain caught up with us, and it was too late. So, but yeah, he went down to the ship store and he bought a few USS America T-shirts and boxer shorts, and that's what he had for his
nice. And he was the one lucky rag guy. That's the way it works, right? Sometimes you just draw that straw.
Timing is everything.
So how much time did you get being kind of one of the new guys there in Iraq doing the cat missions? Did you get a pretty fair amount of time?
It's interesting. They were very careful about trying to dole out the missions as fairly as possible because everybody wanted to get out there and get their MiG kill, right? So they were really trying to do it. Now I was a new guy with no experience, and my biggest fear was that I wasn't going to be able to tank, or I wasn't going to be able to get aboard at night, or I didn't want to lose sight of my lead at night, when you're flying on formation lights or whatever. I was more afraid of goofing that stuff up than getting shot down, to be honest with you. You don't want to be the weak link, that's what you're afraid of. So, but as the new guy, to answer your question, they gave me a lot of night missions because they knew there were going to be no MiGs at night. So I got I got a ton of night traps, put it that way.
And you were pretty much always on the wing of some hinge, right? Who was leading you?
Yeah, but luckily Snort. I had a JO as a Rio, so we had a great time. And
that's cool.
But usually I was on in fact, I know exactly who my flight lead was, and he was a terrific guy too. Bernie Parent was his name. I think he was a demo pilot at the RAG for a while, and he was just a really good stick. He'd been to Top Gun, and he and I had extensive. He kind of took me under his wing and really spent a lot of extra time talking about flying with me around the ship. He was just a wonderful, wonderful guy.
He was CL VF-14 at one point.
He was. You are absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah. Didn't you fly Dale's wing in Desert Storm as well? Snodgrass?
Well, I did a few missions. Snort was the XO of VF-33, the Starfighters, and which were originally called the Tarsiers, if I'm not mistaken. And it looked like a little monkey, so we called them the Minkies or whatever. We used to make fun of them. But he flew no less than twice a day. He flew 2 or 3 missions a day. He was on all the big missions where there was any opportunity to get a MiG kill. He wanted to get out there and get his MiG kill probably more than any single human being on the planet. And I did get to fly a few missions with him. One warm-up mission we did in Egypt, it was a low-level attack thing, and I was down at as low and as fast as I could stand it. And I was thinking I was a real badass, down low, flying, literally as low as I could stand it. And Snort flew right under my airplane and popped out in front of me, and immediately made me feel like a wuss because he was just that good, And but yeah, the one mission that we were talking about earlier, I recall he had the TF-30s were prone to compressor stalls, and I know he had a finicky motor in it, and it shut down, and he was out there, trying to get a relight on this motor and flying in the middle of a combat mission with one engine, but he wasn't going to abort. That was who he was, who he is. That's
right,
just the kind
right.
of guy he is.
Mission accomplishment over little pesky things like single engine.
Yeah, single engine ops. That's nothing for Snort. F-16s are always single engine, so what's the difference?
It was quite common. I'm sure that you guys know this, but those TF-30s were really, really prone to just compressor stalls, and it wasn't even really a maintenance write-up to shut it down and start it up again. It was just press on, and I did it. As a pilot, you'd have to really fly the throttles on that airplane in some regimes. So it was really a common thing. I actually lost both engines once in a BFM hop. I accidentally backed up the airplane and smoked them both, and both generators went offline, and we kind of tumbled out of the sky and then relit them one at a time and then flew it out of there. And it was embarrassing because right after the generators came back online, after I recovered the airplane, I heard Fox 2 from my wingman as he shot me.
He's like, you're a big target at this point. Easy.
Exactly. And the poor Rio that I was flying with was a guy named Frank Cara, also a terrific guy, and he had actually ejected out of a Tomcat that had a compressor stall, and they lost the airplane, and the pilot was killed. So I felt especially bad that I scared him.
Yeah, he's like, not again.
Exactly.
How unlucky can one guy
Truck
be?
driving school's looking good.
He was a good sport about it. I was feeling really bad. I was like, man, I'm really sorry. But I was in a vertical fight and I bullseyed the airplane and just didn't want to come over, and it just started going backwards, and then big old booms coming out of the motors, and you've got no option. You got to shut one down at least, or you're not going to get it back. So.
Mm-hmm. So what, in that case, thankfully the ground-seeking nose came into play, right? And you just pointed at the deck. And how much altitude do you have?
We were probably at about 15 or 15. Yeah. I think we recovered at around 10 or 11, really. But
that's pretty quick then.
Yeah, I think I topped out probably at like 18 or something, but the low energy departures in an F-14 were never really what got people. We had a guy, a VF-33 guy, that lost one. Again, this was one of these slat things. He had the alpha breaker out and the wing was clean, didn't have the slats out, doing 0.8 Mach, and made a hard turn, reversed a hard turn, and that thing went sideways instantaneously, like 90 degrees per second departure. And they were out of the airplane by 13,000 feet. I mean, that's how there was no recovering that airplane. So the high energy departures were the ones, like in the movie Top Gun, where you're just a frisbee, and the motors go out, and you got no hydraulics, so you have no way of putting any flight control inputs into the flight controls that are not working. So you're SOL at that point.
So you're not thinking to pull the hand pump up out of the side of the seat and start going at it like there's no tomorrow?
I mean, in a flat spin and a high energy departure, the NATOPS, I think, or at least the gauge was that the pilot was at about 6.5 eyeball out G. So you were if your harness wasn't locked, which was the first thing when you depart. But you were never dogfighting with the harness lock, because you need to turn around and look behind you or look over your shoulder or whatever, right? So, when that thing whips around like that, you're pinned up against the instrument panel with 6.5 Gs, and you're not really in fighting shape to recover the airplane. It's a tough scenario. And once we got the GE motors, and certainly with the digital flight controls they put in there, they never had it happen again. So
yeah, and honestly, the procedure was more developed too. I mean, a lot of lessons learned written in blood, as they say, right? So
that recovery procedure was a memorized 14-step procedure, which I still have memorized.
Me too.
That was something that we had to spit out in every training brief, and I guarantee you, most F-14 guys can spit out the spin recovery procedure. It's lasered into my brain still.
Yeah, if we ever had some cause to say, talking to some guy and he says he's a Tomcat guy, okay, tell me spin.
Exactly.
If they can't do it, forget about it.
Right. Yeah. We really respected that. It was a scary thing.
Yeah. Ken, do you want to talk about what's happening there on the flap slat lockout? I mean, we referenced it earlier. So do you want to tell us what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, when a pilot, it depends if it's in manual or automatic, but the slats are on the leading edge of the wing, the flaps are on the trailing edge. Basically what it does is it creates a higher pressure underneath the wing, which provides lift. So with the flap slat system, the slats, the inputs used to run through what they were called asymmetry switches, which are on the outboard edges of the wing. So when they would lock out, when both of the asymmetry switches would get the same input at the same time, they would basically just alternate from one wing to the other, roll out a little at a time. Basically overloaded the system. The torque tubes would just keep spinning until one of the knuckles broke. After that, it was pretty much nothing you could do.
Yeah.
It was those torque tubes were, these aluminum tubes that spun, that pushed the slats out, and they would just snap, and then you'd have one out, and it would sense that the other one had started to retract. If it saw a difference between the two, the computer would say, oh, I don't like this, and it would just stop working. So they would both be stuck where they were. And so that meant that you couldn't put any more flaps out, and you were stuck with an asymmetry on the wing, which means the airplane wants to roll. And I can tell you this, that I had it one night on the ship. I had a slat out. One was out and one was up, and I couldn't get any flaps out. And they were, again, the USS America, trying to get all the boilers up to get enough wind over the deck to land, because our max engagement speed on the hook was 114 knots of closure. Our typical approach speed was 136. With the flaps stuck up, you're looking at about 150 to 155 knots of approach speed, which was too much to land in the arresting gear. So they had to get a lot of wind over the deck to make the closure less. And while they were doing that, I'm flying around in crappy weather at night. It's rainy and no moon, and it's that, dark night that everybody talks about. Right. And try to go to a tanker, and I'm in the clouds, in and out of the clouds with vertigo, trying to get gas off of an S3, and then finally got vectored in, and captain of the ship comes up on the radio and says, "Hey, Leekster, we got the wind. We're going to take you." And in a blue water ops situation without a divert, that if they can't take you, you're looking at a controlled ejection. And at night, that's not a pleasant, not a place you want to be, for sure, for a rescue, right? So, anyways, I ended up getting aboard, but it's one of those where your adrenaline's so jacked up that my legs were just shaking. I mean, trying to taxi out of the landing area, my knees were shaking because trying to taxi the airplane, because you're really on it. That's a tough night on an aircraft carrier for a guy, I think.
Yeah, it's like when the rudder shakers are going.
right, exactly.
Well, I'm thinking I'd like to hear one more story. We got time for one more story, Lorenzo?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to hear a little bit about you were fast forward a little bit in your career to your LSO time, and you were waving, and there was an ejection that happened on the other end of the boat as you were waving. Yeah. So
that was a friend of yours or a colleague of yours.
It's actually both of their skippers.
Yeah. Skipper Twig.
So interesting, actually. We had a pretty high accident rate in those days. On our air wing on that ship, we lost 8 airplanes and 5 guys in 2 years. And the A6s seem to be losing an airplane about every 6 months.
Ouch.
And almost none of them that I recall were pilot error. They were all just catastrophic failures. And in the case of this one, I was headed up to go to the LSO platform to wave. The ship was off of the coast of Norway, near, we were doing operations all the way almost, we actually did go into the Arctic Circle. So you can imagine the water temperature was quite cold. I think it was 35 degrees, and we were all wearing dry suits while we were flying, and it was really unpleasant. So we were flying and blowing snow and ice on the flight deck and stuff that you never imagined that you would be doing as a Navy pilot. Well, I go up there as an LSO, and you would go up right at the end of the launch, and the last plane is on the starboard forward catapult. And it's a KA-6 tanker, if I remember right. It was definitely a tanker mission. I believe it was a K. And Twig's flying it, and they go down the catapult, and I'm just watching them launch because, I love the air show. That's the great thing about being LSO, is it's the greatest air show in the world. So I'm standing there watching them go, and as they go down the stroke, I believe it was the right engine popped. And you just saw a big puff, kind of maybe a quick fireball come out the back end, and the airplane yawed pretty hard. And they were flying, and they were bringing up the gear, and you could just watch the angle of attack increase as the airplane got slower and slower and slower, and you knew it wasn't going to make it, right? And then finally it hit VMC, which means minimum controllable airspeed, and it started to roll right. And those 2 guys decided to give it back to the taxpayers at that point, and they jumped out. Well, by the time the seats, when you pull the handle, it takes about a half a second or so or more before the seat actually leaves the airplane. And by the time the seats came out, it was about 90 degrees angle bank. And the BN, they sit side by side, and the guy on the right, the BN, he goes like 15 degrees to the right, and the pilot goes 15 degrees to the left. So as the airplane rolled right, the BN actually got a worse situation, and the seat shot him down towards the water, and the pilot got a little bit extra going up, right? Yeah. Lucky for him, which was Twig. Right. And the BN, he impacted the water as the chute was kind of deploying. It never really fully inflated. Miraculously, he was not injured. I don't know how, because you can watch this video on YouTube, and it's pretty spectacular. Twig gets in the chute, and I watch him go floating by, and I'm thinking to myself, man, that water's going to be cold, and the helo, was in starboard delta there waiting for him, and then they always have a helicopter there just for this scenario, and they were on him immediately and got those two guys out of the water pretty quick, and they were fine. And that BN, I believe, was his second ejection in that year. I think it was closer to around 8 months.
Ouch.
So he had 2 ejections that year, and I ran into them, Twig, in the hallway, and I said, "Dude, how was it?" I go, "How was the water?" I go, "It had to be cold." He goes, "I didn't feel a thing." He said, I didn't. He said, "It was, my adrenaline was jacked up so high, they pulled me out of the water, and I was back on the ship." And he goes, "I was walking down the passageway to go down to sick bay, and that's when I started shivering." Probably from a combination of the adrenaline and the cold, but yeah, that was quite a show.
Yeah, thankfully they both made it through that one just fine. But sounds like not so good being an NFO in your air wing.
career killer.
Yeah. Oh, the guys, they dropped an A6 out of. We had one come over the LSO platform, and the engine blew up. You can see this on YouTube also. And those guys ejected right off the port side, and the airplane went right in the water. Pieces of glass from the canopy landed on the LSO platform.
Oh yeah.
From the other guys jumped out in Fallon. They had an engine failure on takeoff, and they shelled out a couple miles off the end of the runway at night. Ejecting at night seems very scary to me, but they ended up out in the desert there, and they're standing out there, and they said, "Well, we might as well start shooting these flares." I always wanted to shoot some of these things, so they started pulling out their pencil flares and popping these things off for fun.
It was 4th of July, right? Anyway, so why not, right?
They were happy to be alive, and they were celebrating.
Well, so you end up finishing out your Tomcat career with the reserves, right?
Right. Yeah. I got off active duty, and then I was lucky enough to get hired out at VF-201 in Dallas, and I flew with them for a while before they did the Hornet transition, and it was really neat. A really salty crew. Ironically, my CO, one of my COs was a Rio that shot down one of those MiG-23s in Libya. So we got to hear his MiG debrief. And then when I went to 201, Munster there was his pilot that shot down that MiG-23. So I got to hear his debrief about the Libyan shoot down that those guys participated in. And there was a bunch of other just really experienced pilots.
Which one of the two of them is the one that's screaming on the recording? Good kill, good kill.
That was the West Coast guy that we called Leo the Rio, and he was actually an air wing guy. He was not a squadron guy.
Oh,
and
funny.
I want to say he was flying with the wing ops. Was the pilot.
Oh, funny.
And when those guys shot those AIM-7s, neither of which hit the MiG-23, by the way. Mm-hmm. Munster's AIM-7 hit the first MiG-23, and then Leo and his pilot turned around and hit the second airplane with a winder. And you'll hear him in the video, that famous video where he's like, Leo's going, shoot him, and he's saying, right. I don't have a tone, and he doesn't have a tone because he didn't have the winder volume turned up. And when he turned up the winder volume, then he got a good tone and
screaming tone, right?
Yeah, and then he popped off that heater on that guy. So that's quite a story, actually. That whole thing.
Mm. So now you get to fly very large Tomcats over the ocean.
Yeah,
much less dynamic flying.
Fleet de Ville.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great job. I'm flying 777s for a major, and just came from Paris today, and I love the job. And and my favorite quote is that a lot of folks will say, "Wow, it must be really boring flying an airliner after flying a fighter." And I always say, "Well, it's supposed to be boring, and if it's not boring, I'm having a really bad day." So we like to keep it boring, and I enjoy flying that airplane as much as any airplane. I'll tell you, I like flying the F-14, but I love flying a Cessna 172, and I definitely like flying a 777. It's a good time. It's a really great job. I'm very fortunate.
So I've heard people. One of the Rios in my squadron was fond of saying that the Tomcat. I mean, if you take a Hornet's like okay, it's a Camaro, maybe a Camaro or a Corvette. Tomcat's
Right.
Tomcat's a little more like it takes a little more work, a little more love to get it going, a little more like a Lamborghini, perhaps.
I would agree with that. There was some saying they used to say that a Hornet will take a bad pilot and make them average. A Hornet will also take a good pilot and make them average. Whereas a Tomcat, it was not a fly-by-wire airplane. And, there were guys out there, like Snort and other guys that were just gifted pilots, and they could do things in a Tomcat that nobody could do in any other airplane simply because there wasn't any fly-by-wire system fighting you. So if you were not a particularly skilled pilot, the F-14 was an extremely difficult airplane to fly. It had a lot of moving parts. It required a lot of situational awareness and understanding and feel. If you look at the VN diagrams, which is what we use for dogfighting of any fighter plane out there, the F-16 will give you the same turn rate at 250 knots as it gives you at 450 knots. You can just pull on the pole, whereas the F-14, and your turn radius is obviously going to change, but the turn rate, degrees per second, is going to be the same. And the F-15, the F-18, they're all very forgiving of airspeed. And the F-14, you had to really fly the airspeed, very specific airspeeds to get that airplane to max perform. And then you would deviate from those airspeeds when it was time to make your move. And a guy who could fly that airplane could do magic with it and embarrass people. I mean, it was a great fighter for that kind of stuff. So
you really had to be on your numbers. Yeah,
I was lucky enough. I got to fly the Hornet a little bit with some friends of mine in the RAG there, and that airplane was just beautifully designed ergonomically and very, very easy to fly. But it had to be. You had one guy who's got to run a radar and fly formation and multiple weapon systems. So they made it very easy to fly, very easy to land on the carrier. Those guys had great boarding rates.
Yep.
And the F-14, when I was going through the RAG, we had about a 25% disqualification rate during carrier qualification in the RAG. So we were losing guys. I mean, guys were very talented fighter pilots, could dogfight and fly an airplane. They had terrific grades. But if you can't land on a carrier, you're useless to the Navy. So that was kind of where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, unless they wanted to go fly for Iran, but no one's going to do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was a nice thing about 201 in Dallas. We were kind of land-based, so you could actually flare to land, which that's kind of embarrassing as a Navy pilot, right? We always say flare to land, squat to pee.
What self-respecting Tomcat pilot's going to do that? Well, I completely agree with you. You got to be on your numbers when you're fighting in the Tomcat. Honestly, I think that's one of the, not to totally push the Rio perspective, but I think that's one of the reasons where you could be pilot, you could be head out, not staring at your HUD, and the Rio could be in the back staring at the display, staring at the indicators, and taking the glance back over as you necessary, but just feeding you the numbers. We're 230, 230.
I couldn't agree with you more. I chose the F-14 because I wanted to have a co-pilot. I really was, I had learned how to fly in Southern California, and I had some folks that I knew that had crashed airplanes in the ocean at night, and I really wanted to have a crew. And the Rios, very few pilots probably admit it, but there's a few. They've probably saved many lives. and helped guys. And when you're dogfighting, a guy that can call out airspeed and call out bogeys and tell you if you're fighting two guys, then tell you when the other one's becoming a threat, and you need to move your nose over here, or when you're landing on the ship at night and he can read your VSI or tell you your airspeed's 1 or 2 knots slow. That is a huge game changer in the F-14. A good Rio could really make a big difference.
Yeah. I love the crew concept.
I never understand.
Those guys are my best friends to this day. I mean, I was best man in 2 of my Rio's wedding ceremonies. I mean, they're still my best friends. So that made for camaraderie and something that people don't experience every day. I mean, those are my trusted friends to this day.
Excellent.
Yeah, I never understand the concept of the single seat fighter, and the workload, as you say, get closer to the battlefield, just gets intense. It gets, SAM start flying. You have, you got radar contacts, you got bandits, and you're on an air to ground mission, and it's all you with basically, we'll say with air traffic control whispering in your ear, telling you your contacts and your vectors for them. But still, you have to share that whole workload alone. And yeah, the F-35, the electronic suite gets better with, visibility through the airplane and cameras. But still, it's you. And,
you get task saturated very quickly. And I think there was some statistic out of Top Gun, something like 80 or 90% of airplanes that are shot down, they never knew they were targeted. So, having somebody else there, second set of eyes, to tell you you're about to die if you don't do something right this second, can really, really make a difference.
There are gifted single seat pilots, to say, and there are some really good single seat pilots in there, efficient at what they do. But again, I'll bring back the other question: is do you like flying alone? Isn't it? Having someone to talk to, not necessarily off your wing.
You're almost never alone. You've got a wingman, and if you talk to the F-18 or F-16 guys, or even the A-7, old A-7 guys, they would always tell you how much they would rather fly alone. That they really like that, and maybe there's something to that solitude and knowing that you're the only, everything hinges on you getting it right. But I really appreciated the crew concept in the F-14. Now, I can tell you this, that a not-so-good Rio could really trash your situational awareness very quickly as well.
Yeah.
So,
and I think pretty much every Rio, when they first got to the Fleet Squadron, was an SA suck.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you look down as a pilot and the guy's got the radar pointed somewhere where there's no bogey. So you're like, dude.
Yeah.
So it can go both directions.
But what about for Ken, who's got to work through the night to get a plane up in the morning for an air crew that sucks? They're learning. They're not going to be good yet, but they will be.
Those guys, you never saw anybody work harder than those guys on an aircraft carrier. I can tell you that. I was blown
they're the
away.
true heroes. They are the true heroes behind that. I've said that airframe you guys wouldn't have had nothing to work with without those guys' blood, sweat, and tears underneath you, and girls, and again, Ken, awesome job out there, man, and you gave these guys the tools they needed to work with, and that's the history we all look at today. And
they were fully invested, man. You can see it in their faces.
Yeah,
I know how many times I saw the guys who worked on my jet when we came back on the ship. How happy they were that they had enough jet when we'd come back, or when we'd leave, we had enough jet, and and we'd come up, and the plane captains were very proud of their machines that they took care of. So I noticed it.
You see it in the pictures polishing the canopies. There's a certain pride taking place right there in polishing that canopy. That's their baby. It's their name on the nose gear door.
What are you gonna say, Ken?
I was just gonna say I know. Like maintenance wise, towards probably the last couple months when I got out, it was some astronomical number. It was almost like 60 man hours every flight hour. Mm-hmm. And that was on the older D models.
Yeah, that was the number right before our last cruise. That was we were seeing 60 hours of maintenance per flight hour.
Right.
Which, that's obviously unsustainable. But that's a part support issue. And then on that last cruise, we actually got down to more like 10 because we had all the part support in the Navy because we were the only flying squadron at that point.
It's amazing how that works, right? I mean, when I went to Desert Storm, the jets were always up, and they had all the parts they could possibly want, and they flew like a dream. And but that 60 hours that's very disheartening for the guys that have to bust their butts on those things when they're looking at their Hornet buddies who are about 25 man hours on average. From what I understand, at least the last data that I saw was somewhere around 25.
Yeah, Ken, you guys did some miracles for sure.
Yeah, they were. I tell you what, like I never, there were times where I was like, "What am I doing here?" But looking back, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was pretty amazing. So I remember for workups in 31, right before I got discharged from the Navy, I asked one of the pilots because obviously the D models they don't use burner off the cats.
Right. And
I asked him, I said, "Can you light them up? This is my last cat shot." And he did, and it was the coolest fiat. I can't remember his name. I could see his face vividly. I just can't remember his name.
He wasn't your divot, was he?
He might have been. Might
have been Kiki Komar.
I couldn't even tell you the name, but it was just the coolest thing. Like, wow, this guy just did that for me, and
that's cool.
It's something I'll remember forever.
Yeah. You don't see a lot of 110s in full burner. Well, not full. We still wouldn't be in full burner. We'd be in min burner, but right coming off the cat.
Yeah, and just to have them light them up, just flash them for a couple of seconds. It was just amazing. It was a cool. I wish I would have had a camera to take a picture of it. It was really awesome.
Very cool. Thank you guys. Thank you for everything tonight, and it's been a spectacular show and some absolutely great content we shared and. Very exciting, and thank you, Leekster and Ken. Yeah, absolutely great careers, both of you, and thank you for sharing it with us. And it's quite exciting. Anything you guys want to add at the end here? Anything you want to plug or anything you want to add in?
Oh man, thanks for having me. It was really, really a pleasure. It's fun, If you throw in a couple beers and 5 Tomcat guys in a room, the sun would be coming up, then you'd still be telling stories.
It's true.
That's true.
Well, it truly has been a pleasure to have you on. So thank you much, Leekster.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in a closing thing, I just want to add in one thing, and I think it's time to talk about it, but I don't want to get too much into it. We'll talk about it on the next show a little bit. But I think the time has come. I think it's time to fly an F-14 Tomcat again as a Airshow Warbird, honoring you guys and your hard work. And when the concept was originally thought of, Dale wanted to put something together at the end of the program. But I think the main thing that steered the Navy away was that these airframes, Dale wanted them in his possession, and Dale wanted, to fly them. And I'm not sure who was going to pay for it to say, but I think that with the security issue of the airframe, that as much as Dale was Atlantic Fleet commander, all 350 birds were his, he was still turned down. And that's because the upper level brass is the one that really controls everything. And his plan was to take 5 or 6 airframes and use some for parts and then fly 1 or 2 as, actual warbirds. And I think, again, where it went wrong was his idea of taking the planes. And the idea that I've come up with is that I believe the Navy should retain ownership of their airframe. It is their plane. And they should fly it for us, and they should demonstrate it for us, keeping it within their facility. And understanding the money part aspect of it, that, their money needs to go to the frontline squadrons, which, is always a money problem with these guys because they're always working hard and they're going through money. That's what they do. And the harder you work, the more money you spend. And to be trained properly, you're going to spend money. So for them to turn around and say, okay, let's fly an F-14, they'd have to take money away from our frontline guys right now to do that. And that's obviously unacceptable. And that's why we don't see an airframe flying. But I kind of feel like if the approach was different on it, and the Navy was able to keep the airframe, and the Navy was able to use its own maintainers as far as, say, volunteers from guys like Ken, guys that, put their lives into it. And they have 7 airframes sitting in A-Mark that are 100%, I don't want to say flight worthy, but they're 100% intact, we'll say. And they will need a breakdown. You're going to have to go through them and the whole 9 yards. But of the models, you have a couple of A's, a couple of B's, and a couple of D's. And the B would be the selected airframe because the F-110 is still in production. The dashboard is steam gauge powered. It's this way so that you're away from the MFDs. Because once the airplane's demilled, then you go ahead and you pull out the radar, you pull out the gun, you pull out, then you got to replace all of this weight with ballast. It's not just pull it out. You need the plane to fly correct still. To do that, you got to replace everything. So again, when we talk about that 60 hours maintenance, that all goes away because there is no more weapon system. There is no more, it's out of it. You're working with a wet airframe, an F-4 Phantom, basically, with no electronics. I think that really kills the price of flying the airplane. It really dramatically lowers it to something that's obtainable where, and I've said it and I stand by it. The Navy paid for the airframe for 36 years, and they spent a lot of money in the billions area, way in the billions, and they're not going to pull any more money out to fly this airframe. So in the famous words of John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And with that said, if we really want to see an F-14 Tomcat fly, it's going to take the proper leadership to stand in front of the Navy and say, we'll do what we have to do. We will get a fundraiser. We will raise the money. We will put the people in place. And these are all your people. And hand you that check and say, do what you got to do with it. Just make sure that airplane is at Oshkosh 2021 on the flight line with the announcer there. And it's something I see achievable. But again, what do you guys think about that?
It's a dream. It's definitely a dream. I couldn't even begin to see how the Navy would definitely have to buy into it. I think you're right. But wow, it's one of those things I would love to see, but I wouldn't begin to tell you how to do it.
But I could see the way that you could do it would be to engage the test pilot school, because they maintain about 30 or 40 different airframes, and if you gave them an F-14 for the test pilot school guys to fly around every once in a while to analyze the flight characteristics in their training, then you would kind of have a double win-win situation where the Navy could benefit from that, and but it would be out of Pax River, obviously, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, part of the report that I kind of wrote was about 13 pages long, was that the plane would actually stay at a Naval Air test station, based on the bases like Oceana. The tempo is way out of control. The last thing they want there is a Tomcat disrupting everybody, distracting the flow of work. So a test base would be the place, like Leekster said, and where it would go to say. For a pilot, I just basically had wrote down just people I'm aware of and I know. And I have an F-14B Red Ripper pilot, and he dropped his airframe off in the desert in 2005. He still has the paperwork for the drop-off from storage. And he's still serving in the Navy right now. And I think that means a lot. And I think the publicity level on it to send this pilot back to AMARC, of the two F-14B sitting there, one of them is the CAG Ripper. So you're going to send the Ripper back 15 years later to go get his jet and bring it back. The publicity involved in putting it up in an air show, as well as a legacy Warbird. You want to talk about a sold-out air show. You want to talk about people coming internationally from all over the world for this. I mean, the recruiting levels, what it did originally, 500% with the F-14 and movie Top Gun. And so I think there's a lot to be had in this. I think it's something that could be feasibly considered, something I'd like to continue to talk about, how we would get to that road. I do believe it is possible. Again, our forefathers taught us in this great country that if you're willing to work hard and you have a dream and it's of a righteous state, there's no reason why you can't achieve it. And what is our dream? To honor the United States Navy and pay for it. And if that can be, if that could come together, I think there's a fighting chance. But that's all for another show, another time.
Amen.
But I just wanted to throw that out there because we do talk about it from time to time, and it's something that we don't want to steer away from. Obviously, we want to keep mentioning the fact that it's time. It is absolutely time. These airframes can't wait forever. They can't sit there forever. They've reached the max of what they can store them at before they become just little, I don't want to say junk, but at this point, they already need to be broken down and gone through, and the time and frame involved in that, and the money and the work and the demilling process, and there's a lot involved. So it's obviously not just stand there and go, I want to fly a Tomcat. Right. It's an interesting scenario. But again, though, I thank you guys. Thank everyone for coming tonight. It's absolutely awesome. It was a great show, and we got a lot of great content in, and we're looking forward to the next show already, third show. So very cool. Thank you very much.
Good deal.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good night, guys.